Good afternoon. I'm Brandon Busty, President of University Partners and Global Head of Learn, Work, Innovation at Kaplan. And I'm delighted to welcome you to my first ever LinkedIn Live broadcast as part of a new series called Bold Leaders in Learning. And I'm delighted to have a good friend as my first guest, Jon Kaplan, who's the founder of Corvantus Consulting and the former Chief Learning Officer of Discover Financial Services.
I was running all of learning at that time for Discover, and a big part of my organization was running the call center training programs. And so, call center training programs, they require an enormous number of trainers because the way you run them is when you onboard new employees and you're always onboarding, you actually have to have on a face-to-face experience for people as they're getting acclimated to the company. And so most of the trainers that you have are people who, were call center agents for 2 or 3 years and then became trainers. And so they're relatively young in their careers. Demographically, they're very representative of the population that you hire for your call centers. And really, very few of them had college degrees. And so we had probably in my organization reporting up to me, we had 75 or 100 trainers, all of whom were sort of in between about 25 and 35, and very few of them had college degrees. And they were all participating in the tuition reimbursement program. And so I had heard all stories about it. First of all, I'd heard this is a wonderful program. Gosh, it is so great that Discover is helping fund my college degree attainment. And number two, it's really a pain to participate in this program because I have to fund it outright, which
Yeah.
cost me, it can cost me a few $1,000s just to get tied up in tuition while I'm waiting for a reimbursement. Um, and just to constantly have to managing this paperwork, and so that's why I was really excited to take over the program. And it just so happens that about the same time I was invited to participate in the Obama administration's Upskill America initiative, which was an effort by the Department of Labor, the Department of Education, and I believe Commerce. They were partnering together to try to encourage companies to invest more in their frontline workers. And they invited me and a bunch of similarly positioned leaders in education to the White House to talk about this. And I got to meet some really great people, and I started building an understanding of what a great tuition education, what a really good education program would look like. And so that's sort of how it all started for me.
Yeah, and it sounds like around that same time frame is when I believe the Starbucks, Howard Schultz and Michael Crow led partnership between Starbucks and ASU crept up, and I know that was a fairly influential moment as well. And just be interesting to you had made the comment to me in a conversation we had earlier about the importance of executive leadership behind this, right? And really, kind of making sure that employees understand and appreciate the opportunities being provided. It's one thing to kind of have tuition reimbursement on the back shelf that might be accessible and in a less direct way. It's another thing to be out there promoting it. And just curious, your observations that you took away from the Starbucks initiative that Howard Schultz was behind.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say that if Howard Schultz hadn't done what he did with Michael Crow and the Starbucks program, none of us would be here talking about this right now. I mean, that was really a seminal program, and I remember seeing him interviewed on a news program, and it was probably a 10 or 15 minute clip where he talked about how Starbucks was investing in their employees so that their employees could live to their highest ambitions. And it involved not staying at Starbucks and being a barista for the rest of their lives, but using that time to develop a set of skills and go back to school and prepare themselves for other occupations in the world. And I just remember thinking to myself, when you listen to chief executives talk about their companies, typically they talk about how they focus on customers. They spend a lot of time talking about shareholder, the interests of shareholders. They oftentimes they talk about how great their employees are and how their employees are wonderful in meeting customer needs. Rarely do they talk about the needs of their employees and how they're meeting the needs of their employees. And I found it so inspiring that you had a chief executive who was taking his time to stump for this program that he had built with Michael Crow and at ASU, and that I think changed the way people think about education about corporate responsibility towards frontline employees.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And look, you've obviously kind of described the lead up to this. You getting the opportunity to kind of oversee the tuition reimbursement program and understanding the nuances of what was and wasn't working. Opportunity to interact with people as part of the White House Council and really understand that. To see this seminal leadership being driven by that opportunity between ASU and Starbucks, and so take me through what happened in terms of making the sale to Discover, right? You're an executive at Discover, but you've got to sell this to the CFO, to the CEO. They presumably have to sell it to a board of directors, right? So how do you get a company to make the investment, right? And to look at this not just as a nice benefit, but something that has a real ROI behind it.
Yeah, so I think it became immediately clear to me that I needed three things, and I already had one of them. The first thing I needed was I needed a point of view on what was a really distinguishing education assistance program. I mean, there are a lot of details in these programs, and really understanding what is going to promote the interest of the company as well as the interest of the employee. I need to really understand that. Second thing I needed to have is I need to have some data on the financial benefits of running one of these programs. I think both for employees and for shareholders. The
Hmm.
third thing I needed is you need a generally supportive C-suite. And one thing I would say is one of the reasons why I came to Discover is I felt that the executives at Discover were 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 really we're really behind the interest of employees, and especially our call center employees. And Discover had a long history of supporting call center workers. They never outsourced, they never offshored. They ran all call centers in the United States. And the way they did medical care, the way they did compensation, I always felt like it was a very sort of pro worker company, and that's one of the reasons why I went there, because I felt that my personal values were reflected in the company values. And so, but in terms of the first two, the first thing I did was I called one of the people I met at the White House, Jamie Fall, who is at the Aspen Institute, and he's
Yep.
deep into this. He's running the Upskill America initiative right now.
Yeah.
I said, look, can you get me some conversations with some people who are really forward thinking on the subject? And so I had meetings with Daimler Chrysler and JetBlue and Cigna and a bunch of others, and that sort of refined my understanding of what a good education assistance program would look like. The second thing I did is I called Haley Glover at the Lumina Foundation,
Hmm.
and after talking a bit, she agreed to help run an ROI study at Discover to assess what's the return on investment for investing in education benefits. And what we found, and this was no small surprise, I think anyone who had any connection with our tuition reimbursement program knew that it had enormous benefits to the company. And what we
Right.
found, we quantified it, that every dollar we spent on tuition reimbursement returned that dollar plus another dollar 41 in or dollar 44 in offset costs and benefits just from talent management. So we had we had lower absenteeism, we had higher retention, we had higher promotions, and all that. And we didn't even really look at performance. Performance was a very difficult thing to quantify. We looked at it in small areas, but even taking the promotions and transfers and absenteeism and retention, that's where we got an ROI of 144%. And that was enough to go to the C-suite and say, look, as you know, I've been working on this program. We've looked at the ROI. We believe that we are dramatically under investing in this program. So I'm going to ask two things for you. One today, and then I'm going to ask more of you in about 6 months. But the first thing I'm going to ask is, let's waive the 1 year tenure requirement. So right now,
Yeah.
one of the biggest benefits is that it reduces attrition. and we have the highest attrition among our first year employees. Let's
Right.
get them enrolled in college,
Yep.
and let's see if we can reduce the attrition there, because that's what matters most in terms of our attrition costs. And
Yeah.
so the answer was yes. And the second question I asked is, what I'd like the opportunity to come back and really give you a proposal for what a distinguished education assistance program would really look like. And that eventually ended up as the Discover College Commitment, which we rolled out in June of 2018.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, that's one of those insights that I think is really profound, right? You looked at that and said, "Geez, our turnover is highest in our employees, 0 to 1 year in, and yet, this is a benefit that most companies didn't have available until some period of tenure, right?" And so I just think that those are examples, very powerful examples of where you get to 144% return on investment. That, by the way, is a very serious return. I mean, that's the kind of sales pitch you can make to a CFO and to a board and say, not only is this, something that has a real strong moral appeal, right, in terms of helping people, achieve education and advance their careers, but this is good business sense for our organization. And I look, we can't have a conversation today without thinking about what does this all mean in the context of COVID-19 pandemic. So, one of the things I've been thinking about, and I'm sure you have too, is what happens with the education as a benefits movement now that we're in an environment where, for example, in the last 4 weeks alone, 22 million Americans have filed for unemployment. We're looking at a potential unemployment rate that could rival the Great Depression. The highest that the U.S. has ever hit, 24.9%, is a potential here. So I've been thinking about it through a couple lenses. There's the positive end of this. I wrote a brief article in Forbes about education as a purpose, right? So not just thinking about it as a powerful benefit for employees while they're working, but as we think about all the people who are being laid off or furloughed as a result of this, to what degree can education be something that serves as their purpose during this time, right? To help as a reskilling or upskilling for new job opportunities when they reemerge. And then on the flip side, I'm worried about, so I think that's a positive potential extension of these types of strategies. But on the other hand, look, companies are cutting all kinds of things right now, including cutting staff and then laying folks off. So are these programs, are these education as a benefit programs going to survive something like COVID-19?
Well, the truth is, I don't think we know, and they probably won't survive intact everywhere. But what I'll say is that there are sort of four big reasons why you would run an education as a benefit program. Um, and the first is that it's really a talent acquisition and retention play, right? So can you acquire the right talent, and can you get them? Can you retain them? The second one, and this is actually relates to your education as a purpose article that you wrote, which I thought was great. But it's about engaging your talent. And so when you have your talent there, are they fully committed to your company? Are they delivering discretionary work? That's sort of the education as a purpose, or education as an engagement strategy, is really critical. The third is skill development. Are you taking all of your employees and just upgrading their skills? Can you make them better problem solvers, better critical thinkers? Do they synthesize information from the reading that they do? Those are all things that every single employee needs. And then the fourth is there that education as a builder of strategic talent? Like every single company realizes that there are some key roles that
Yeah.
they really need just outsized talent in. And a
Right.
lot of companies now are thinking around analytics, right?
Yep.
Digital design, software development. I mean, there are these keys job areas where they really want to just triple down and invest to make sure you have those key strategic skills. Not like everyone in the company needs to have those, but you need a few people that are great at those.
Right.
Now, if you think about those four different areas: talent acquisition and retention, purpose or engagement, skill development, capability building, three of them are going to apply in a post-COVID world.
Right.
It's just that talent acquisition and retention gets a little wonky when you have, sort of when you have 22 million recently unemployed people. It's going to be easy to attract talent, at least a talent for opening roles. That is not going to be hard because we have high unemployment, and it's going to be easy to retain your workers because you have such a high unemployment rate. But those other things are going to apply for as long as long as we can see out into the future. And so I just wonder how many companies are starting to think as education assistants as building engagement, building talent, building capabilities. And if they do think
Right.
about that, they're going to be very loath to cut these programs.
Right. I mean, there's clearly a lot to your point. Several aspects of these, let's just say, education as part of your corporate strategy, right? That are going to be that were valued before COVID-19 are going to be valued during and will be valued long after whatever happens with the pandemic. Certainly, there's going to be the challenging aspect of near-term budget decisions and certain things like that are going to be inevitable. But it's something I've been thinking about in the context of to your point about strategic hiring, right? And what I've referred to as a GoPro early model. And for those of you who are just joining the feed, I'm in a conversation right now with Jon Kaplan, who is the former CLO of Discover Financial Services, one of the pioneers of outstanding education as benefit programs, and we're talking about whether these programs survive and in what form as a result of COVID-19. One of the thoughts I've had, John, is that as we think about the jobs that are still available, because there are still jobs still available in the U.S., we've obviously shed a lot of jobs. The question is going to be how many of those jobs come back, where people can actually go back and get that same job with the same skill set, versus there'll be jobs available, but the distance between a person who doesn't have a job and that job is going to be some education or skill training deficit, right? Now, we had a skills gap in the United States long before COVID-19 disruption. There were something like 7 million jobs open in the US that were unfilled. And so that's something I wonder about too, right? That we actually have a more pressing need for upskilling and reskilling because we may get the economy back in order in some form, but a lot of the jobs that people were hoping to return to may not be there. But there's other jobs they could get where, like I said, that deficit is that training. What are some other ideas? Obviously, companies can do a lot here. Higher ed can step in and play a role, but you've got some other thoughts, I think, on how we might design a better talent development ecosystem in our country.
Yeah, so I mean, I actually think that one of the responses, the long-term responses to COVID, is going to be companies moving more aggressively to automating more of their work. And that's I just think that when companies take a step back and look at their business recovery plan and realize we had to stop functions in every single part of our company because we relied on people to do this work. If we hadn't had to rely on people, if we had more, more automated functions, we could have kept more of the company up and running. And that's I just think is a reality that we are hurtling towards the fourth industrial revolution, and I think that future only becomes closer now. And so given that, I mean, we have to think about how all players can work together to ensure that we're transitioning people who have a set of skills that only work up through the third industrial revolution, but no longer work for the fourth industrial revolution, to the right types of jobs that are actually going to create meaningful wages and a meaningful standard of living for the long haul. And that is only going to take place with a combination of government and universities and private sector employers.
Yeah, I've actually been surprised that we haven't heard more details about, from a stimulus package perspective, about really new dynamic opportunities to support companies or other organizations to provide more upskilling and reskilling, and have the equivalent of Pell grants available for that or whatever it might be. There's a lot of different structures, but I would like to believe that those are things that are going to be part of the conversation going forward, and we'll see what happens there. I'm curious, going back to this GoPro early idea. It's an idea I wrote about last year. The idea of companies starting to hire students directly out of high school and making part of the attractiveness of the job offer be that they'll pay for your college degree. it's certainly not a pathway for everybody, but there's a sizable percentage of the marketplace of prospective college students, right, who are thinking about, geez, I can't afford the price tag of college. I still want a degree. If there's an employer who might support me in that way, I'd be very interested in going to work for that employer. And now obviously I have to juggle working with pursuing my degree. That's the thing that every non-traditional age working adult who's enrolled in college has been doing anyhow. So I wonder, like, do you see more promise or less promise for the growth of go pro early opportunities as companies on one hand are thinking about talent development, and students on the other hand are thinking about getting a college degree, having the work experience, and making it more affordable on the other hand?
Yeah, I actually see this accelerating, and the reason is sort of twofold. One is that we have this need to shift the curriculum towards something that is gonna be very useful to work in a post automation world. And universities have never been that fast around changing their curriculum. And so I think as the skill requirements change faster and faster, uh, private employers are the only ones who can sort of manage that, and they're going to need to put sort of buying pressure on universities. So that's one thing. The second thing is that this only works in an environment where college is unaffordable to young people coming
Right.
out of high school. And I think it actually gets more unaffordable. And the reason is during recessions people flood back into school because that's the one thing they do. You can't find a job, go to school for a little while. That's actually going to inflate the cost of tuition. And so I think you're actually going to have the dynamics that make that GoPro model even more attractive because college is going to become even more unaffordable, and the skills that we're developing out of those college programs are going to be less and less well connected to what business really needs. And so, in that dynamic, I think an environment in which employers hire
Yeah.
people and then pay colleges to develop the right curriculum for their employees, I think becomes even more attractive.
Yeah, it's just a shorter distance between the various goals that the consumers in this system have in mind, right? And most colleges and universities don't want to refer to students as consumers or employers as consumers, but they're consumers and customers of higher education. And I think I continue to believe higher education can play a huge role in this, but it's probably going to be in a different size and shape, right? Where this may not be students coming physically to a campus, but doing online degrees, still something that individuals are eager to pursue and companies want to have in the form of the talent that they're hiring and developing. So I guess it also gets into non-degree programs, which we haven't really touched upon. The idea that higher ed, as long as it thinks about itself as delivering education more broadly and doesn't lock its mindset into only degree-based offerings, right, can deliver a whole bunch of custom design training, industry specific training, and that might not be something that a lot of the liberal arts institutions want to think of themselves as doing. But if that's part of a continuing and professional ed school and offering that they have, there's a lot of opportunities in here for higher ed, even though it might feel to many college universities like they're getting left behind by these kind of employer direct educational initiatives. So I mean, overall, do you I mean what's your feeling on higher education's role? What would be the first thing you'd do if you were a college president right now, worried about enrollment and thinking about what could I do to increase the financial footing of my institution?
Well, I think right now there's going to be a great a falling out of universities that can't move online. I think what we're having right now is that every single all universities right now are doing their instruction online. And so, there were a large number of consumers that were uncomfortable with that. Rather, they did maybe some online, but enrolled. I think 90% of online programs were, within 90 miles of where the brick and mortar university resided. And so, I think that what you're going to see is that more people are going to get comfortable with online learning, and that's going to allow the big online powerhouses to scale even faster, and that's going to put enormous pressure on smaller liberal arts college that require a residential college experience. And so I think it's actually going to make it very difficult to survive as a college if you don't have a strong competitive online footprint.
Yeah, I agree. And as much as that sounds rather pessimistic as a forecast, right? I think it's the reality. And, look, no one can predict right now whether colleges are going to be able to open up in the fall. If they do, that there won't be some recurring outbreak, right? Some ongoing social distancing measures that make being on campus really difficult to do. So, there's the short term impact, but I think the longer term, right? I actually think there could be some real innovations that come from this. So, if, for example, I'm a fairly expensive residential based private institution and I trade on the value of that on campus experience, great. Assuming we can get back to some degree of normal, I can continue to do that. But I see a world where institutions will be able to offer differentiated pricing for differentiated experience. So I can get my bachelor's degree online, or I can do my bachelor's degree with the precious campus place based experience. And there's a price differential, right? This one's 20% less than this one, and I don't have room and board included. I actually think those are different and distinct marketplaces of students, right? Where there are students who don't want to make a trade off in that place based experience and will continue to yearn for it. And there'll be those who go, hey, if I could get that degree from that institution and do it for 20% less because it's online, I'm all in, right? So I'm hopeful that we'll see some of those innovations. But to your point, the question is going to be how fast can those institutions move, right? And how big a hit are they taking financially in the interim, and how many of them have the ability to survive? So look, I'm a strong proponent of higher ed in the United States, but I think we're all going to have to be prepared for a number of drastic scenarios here. That said, my optimistic view is this is a time for innovation. I can't imagine a better time to be unshackled by the sacred cows and other cultural norms that have been established in higher ed that have prevented us from thinking about innovative options. So
I mean, you have millions of parents right now that are getting their first taste of their children being in online learning programs, and
yeah,
you're like, some of them aren't great, right?
right,
We've seen that, right? But on the other hand, all of a sudden, it's part of the consideration set, and there are pieces of it. I think everyone's looking at this and saying, hey, there are pieces of this that actually are effective, and then when you have parents start to say, maybe we should consider a blended program or an online college for you in the fall. And I think you don't have to
right.
have a huge swing in the number of people who will consider it to really change the marketplace. And I think that's what you're going to see.
Yeah, yeah, I think so too, John. And I really want to say thank you for joining for this. And we had scheduled for roughly 30 minutes of chat time. We're about at that marker, and grateful for you carving out the time from Chicago today and joining as part of the first live cast. And to the folks who tuned in, I know we had some technical difficulties in the beginning. We are going to be posting the full session on my LinkedIn page shortly after this. So if you missed the beginning, all of it's going to be there. John, thank you again for being part of this, and look forward to more conversations in the future with you.
Well, thank you. This was delightful.